Look, I understand that Blake Lively is not the most popular person in Hollywood at this moment. She's not the most popular person anywhere else outside of Hollywood at this moment either. She's doing a press tour for her film It Ends With Us, which has as its principal subject domestic violence. And in the midst of a series of interviews that have caused incredible backlash on social media and in the media, she's being absolutely savaged for a series of appearances on behalf of the film promoting it. She also invoked Lana Del Rey, whose song Cherry from Lana's 2017 album Lust for Life appears in the film, saying to Olivia Marks of Hits Radio UK earlier this month that she was begged to remove that song from the scene in which it appears. She is asked by Olivia Marks, or Olivia Marks actually first says, "Oh, I did also scream when I heard Cherry by Lana Del Rey." Screamed, she says. And Blake says, "Right? And they begged me to take that song out of the movie." And then Blake is asked, "Why?" And she rolls her eyes and lets out this sigh and says, "Oh, I'm not supposed to be talking about this." But then she does talk about it. And she says, "They felt like it was too charged and heavy and things were still good with Ryle at that point. So you don't want to feel that charge." And I was like, the moment Atlas enters, things are charged and heavy. There's conflict, there's pain, there's turmoil, there's tension, because you're like, oh my God, my soulmate, the one that got away, this person who is haunting me in everything I do and everywhere I go, is here now. And we still have that connection. And you can be deeply in love with this person, and then this person comes in and your insides are going to be a mess. So that's why. And Olivia Marks then sort of leans into Blake and she says, "Lana knows." And Blake leans into Olivia and she says, "Lana knows." And she goes on to say, it's just like it hits after that and you're like, oh no, she's screwed. And it's not a love triangle at all. It's just about how she feels in her gut. Well, Cherry is one of those Lana songs that doesn't explain everything for you. It explores the theme and lets you, the listener, come to your own conclusions. It was rumored at the time Cherry came out to be about her then boyfriend, rapper G-Eazy. And there was a Bustle article about that. Bustle put out an interesting post about the song. And the way they discuss the song basically exemplifies the very kind of turmoil that Blake Lively says the song speaks to for her. The Bustle piece says of Cherry that Del Rey has never made a secret of the fact that her romances are pretty high-octane, dramatic affairs. In 2014, the Lust for Life singer told Rolling Stone that she thrives on romantic intensity, describing her relationships as more of an extension of the creative process. There are high-impact events that happen, or big adventures, or big fallouts. As such, while the lyrics like "real love is like feeling no fear" might sound a little extreme, presumably this could be just how she rolls. Blake Lively in the interview never answers the question as to why she was, as she claims, begged not to use this Lana song in this movie about domestic violence. But I don't think we'd have to think too hard to surmise for ourselves why that might have been. It's quite possible that the very criticism with which Lana's earliest albums were met still lingers throughout Hollywood to this day, and especially within the context of a film about domestic violence. We have to go all the way back to 1962 to really get at the root of this, okay? Because that year, there's this group called the Crystals who released a song called "He Hit Me and It Felt Like a Kiss." It's produced by a maniac named Phil Spector, who was one of the most successful and brilliant producers in the history of rock and roll, but also a crazy person. And we'll get to that in a little bit, okay? He produces this record. It comes out, and initially it starts to gain some traction, but also some serious criticism. Even in 1962, people are like calling radio stations and saying, what is this? He hit me and it felt like a kiss. What is this? Glorifying a guy beating his girlfriend? What? And so Dave Thompson over at allmusic.com, a fantastic music writer, devotes a whole post to this song. So you can really get a feel for what it was about, how it hit audiences in 1962, and what was done about that. And again, Believe me, this all relates to the reasons why people in Hollywood might be begging marquee actresses like Blake Lively to not go anywhere near Lana Del Rey's music in any film, no less a film on the topic of domestic violence. Okay? Dave Thompson says this. He Hit Me and It Felt Like a Kiss was written by Jerry Goffin and Carole King after their live-in babysitter Eva Boyd, 19-year-old singer Little Eva, returned from a weekend away with her boyfriend covered in bruises. The boyfriend seemed to have spent the entire weekend hitting the girl, but when questioned about it, the girl didn't bat an eyelid. He hit her because he loved her, and in the song, because she deserved it. It was a brutal song, as any attempt to justify such violence must be, and Spector's arrangement only amplified its savagery, framing Barbara Alston's lone vocal amid a sea of caustic strings and funereal drums. Sounds a lot like Lana's music, doesn't it? While the backing vocals almost trilled their own belief that the boy had done nothing wrong. In more ironic hands and a more understanding age, this was 1962, He Hit Me might have passed at least as satire, but Spector showed no sign of appreciating that. Nor did he feel any need to. No less than the song's writers, he was not preaching, he was merely documenting. Very important language there. He was not preaching, he was documenting as an artist, which perhaps Lana does, and which perhaps Blake Lively does too. Unfortunately, very few people agreed with Phil Spector. While radio play was initially encouraging, the complaints quickly began pouring in, and with the general public itself apparently preparing to rise up in protest against the record, igniting one of those periodic feeding frenzies to which society is so oddly prone, Spector pulled the single, ironically just as it prepared to enter the chart. Controversy can encourage sales, after all, as well as cripple them. Lana alludes to this Crystal song in her own song many years later in 2014, on her record Ultraviolence. In fact, the title track of that record, produced by Dan Auerbach of the Black Keys. And Lana warned us about that record. It was her second record, her sophomore effort after Born to Die comes out in 2012. She said of the album that it was, quote, darker than the first, so dark that it's almost unlistenable and wrong. Lana warned us, right? And so she delivers this title track with lyrics like, I can hear sirens, sirens, he hit me and it felt like a kiss. I can hear violins, violins, give me all that ultra violence. He hurt me, but it felt like true love. Jim taught me that loving him was never enough. Now those lyrics speak perfectly to the paradox underlying the Blake Lively film's logline, which you can find at online. I mean, look up any site that talks about this film right now, and you can find this logline which says, sometimes it is the one who loves you who hurts you the most. It can be said, it seems to me, that in Lana Del Rey, Blake Lively has found an artist whose music speaks most directly to those kinds of anguishing contradictions and ironies that can exist at the heart of any intense romantic love affair. And in this film, it ends with us. Those dynamics play out in the ugliest of ways, in the form of domestic violence, which is a very real circumstance that far too many women face, right? And both Lana and Blake, in their own ways, are getting that across here. But that's getting lost in the midst of a bunch of heated criticism, as happens with Lana's music, as is happening, I think, in the case perhaps of Blake Lively, although to some extent she has done herself no good. Yes, with some of her appearances, I will concede that and get to that. But one wonders, why exactly would Lively be begged to not use the music of the very artist who, as Lively and Olivia Marks say in that interview with Radio Hits UK, knows? There's a danger of taking things like this, especially Lana's song, too literally. I mean, it just as easily could be a persona exploring the mindset of a woman who is addicted to her abuser, who has like a Stockholm Syndrome thing going on, a woman simply experiencing domestic violence. What what goes on perhaps in the minds of some victims of that? Well, as we know, a lot of abuse victims return to their abusers. That's rather well known. A lot of victims of abuse are prone to blaming themselves for it. I couldn't love him enough. That's why he's doing this to me. I mean, Lana isn't dreaming that out of thin air. That's a real dynamic in domestic abuse situations. Okay, we know this. This isn't fiction. Okay, it's not an exaggeration either. Art has to be allowed room to face difficult realities. I mean, just as it may be given room to confront those realities. And what Lana does is explores these difficult realities. And art must be given the room to explore difficult realities. That's what Lana's doing, I would argue, in songs like this. Okay, it can either explore them, it can confront them, it can be art/advocacy. Lana isn't much of an advocate, and it turns out perhaps that Blake Lively might not be much of an advocate either, and that might not necessarily be the terrible thing it's being made out to be in the media, in the case of either Lana or Blake. When Lana comes out with this song in 2014, oh boy, I mean, the backlash, in 2014 to some extent resembled the backlash that the Crystals and Phil Spector dealt with in 1962, but now we're in 2014 in an entirely different era, a different society, as Dave Thompson's review alludes to, right? And now in 2014, when Lana comes out with this song alluding to this Crystals record from 1962 that essentially had to be pulled and banned from radio play because of the backlash it was receiving, The Guardian suggests that Lana's song, quote, endorses and justifies abuse and, quote, romanticizes brutality. Time magazine said it's a pretty straightforward glorification of domestic violence, but, hedging their bets here, it's probably worth noting that Lana Del Rey, the artist-born Elizabeth Grant, is different from Lana Del Rey, the flawed character who narrates screwed-up tales of vice and luxury that the real-life LDR likely wouldn't endorse. Now, that statement is absurdly contradictory, Time magazine, because you can't have it both ways. Is it a persona, or is she glorifying violence? Which is it? You want to have it both ways, but it kind of can't be both simultaneously. And this is the trap that people fall into when they want to interpret Lana's songs in such a literal-minded fashion as to accuse her of glorifying brutality, of endorsing domestic violence. Where in that song does she necessarily do that? Where in that song is she saying, it's good that this is happening to this woman. I endorse this message. It's a real-time effort at being present with this victim of domestic violence and what her mindset may be as she's experiencing this. And as I just said, and as you can see if you do any research on domestic violence, she may be justifying what's being done to her. That is not a strange dynamic. That is, unfortunately and very tragically, a common one. Lorde, remember her, We Can Be Royals, said this of ultraviolence, quote, I listened to that Lana Del Rey record, and the whole time I was just thinking, it's so unhealthy for young girls to be listening to, I'm Nothing Without You, she said in an interview with The Fader. This sort of shirt-tugging, desperate, don't leave me stuff. That's not a good thing for young girls, even young people to hear. Okay, Lord, but guess what? Ultraviolence isn't a children's album. Okay? Maybe we can trust parents to monitor the things that their children are listening to. And it's not Lana's responsibility to do that for them. It's not her problem. Lana's concern is her art. You get tired of artists being begged to feel responsible for, the impact that their work might have on whatever constituency, in this case, children. I mean, are we returning to the days when parents sued Ozzy Osbourne because their son committed suicide after listening to his song Suicide Solution, a lawsuit that went nowhere for them? Is that where we are again? I mean, that was, 45, 50 years ago now almost? And we're back there again? We're going to sue Lana if kids behave in a certain way in some connection, direct or indirect, to her music? Lana's responsible for that. It was Ozzy's fault that this kid killed himself. And that was terrible, of course. But good grief. He's responsible for that? The artist who's depicting situations like addiction to substances like alcohol. Wine is fine, but liquor's quicker, right? Okay. And then it's his fault that someone listens to that and does themselves in. Is that where we are again? Spin said this about the song: though she neither condemns nor condones domestic violence, the soft glow surrounding those words may be controversial for some listeners, especially after the gangster Nancy Sinatra's despairing comments about feminism in her recent Fader cover story, in which she says, quote, "For me, the issue of feminism is just not an interesting concept. I'm more interested in, SpaceX and Tesla. What's going to happen with our intergalactic possibilities?" But, Spin is right. It's not Lana's job to condemn or condone. It's her job to explore and leave the rest up to the listener. That's what artists do. But it gets even deeper than this. The reasons, you hear this adding up, right? I mean, the people involved in this film with Blake Lively, It Ends With Us, which has as its heart the subject of domestic violence, are being encouraged by Blake Lively to include a Lana Del Rey song in a film about domestic violence, while Cherry itself isn't as explicitly about domestic violence as the title track of Ultraviolence is. Still, there's all of this backstory in which Lana Del Rey has explicitly herself been accused of glorifying brutality, of endorsing violence of this nature, domestic violence, in songs like Ultraviolence. And could this perhaps be the answer as to why she really was being begged to remove Cherry from this film? A question she doesn't answer in that interview with Olivia Marks. But it gets even deeper than that, because Phil Spector, as I mentioned, was a crazy person. Phil Spector was a gun nut. He once shot a gun off in a recording session where John Lennon was right there in the studio and started screaming at him. "We can do whatever, you shoot whatever gun you want, but don't mess with me ears," I think he says to Phil Spector. Spitting man. Well, Phil Spector shot Lana Clarkson in the mouth on February 3rd, 2003, while in his mansion. And on April 13th, 2009, he's found guilty of murder. And then the following month, on May 29th, he's sentenced to 19 years to life in prison at age 69, which at that age is essentially a death sentence. And he did die in jail not too long ago. And this is a guy who pioneered the wall of sound. This is a guy who produced some of the most timeless hits of the 1960s, like "Be My Baby" by the Ronettes. Then he "Kissed Me" and "Da Do Ron Ron" by the Crystals. He produces the Righteous Brothers' "You've Got That Loving Feeling," which was a number one. You've Lost That Loving Feeling, which was a number one hit for the Righteous Brothers. "You've Lost That Loving Feeling" and was the most played song on radio and TV of the entire 20th century. This is how much money this man made. Okay. He co-wrote that gorgeous song "Spanish Harlem" for Ben E. King. When he was a teenager, he had this track with a group called the Teddy Bears in 1958. To Know Him Is to Love Him, which sold 1 million copies. He produced the weirdest album of Leonard Cohen's life in 1977 called "Death of a Ladies' Man." 3 years later, he produces an album for the Ramones called "End of the Century." In 1975, he produces a pretty great album by Dion that I love as well. But he himself, again, returning to this theme of domestic violence, sees his own life come crashing down as a result of a domestic violence incident that ends in murder. And Lana knew this. She knew, alluding to the song by the Crystals, was also to allude by then, in 2014, to a song produced by a man who had been convicted of murder and sentenced essentially to life in prison. And Lana went there, because that's what she does. She goes there, okay? And boy, does she take some heat for it, justly or unjustly. And if you've seen my prior videos on Lana Del Rey, you see that for the most part, I find the criticism to be misplaced and irrational. And I'm hearing a lot of that irrationality in this Blake Lively / Lana Del Rey fiasco as well. So yes, in the most painful of ways and the darkest of ways, Lana's song speaks directly to and draws from a song with a legacy deeply rooted in domestic violence, which again is the central theme of this Blake Lively movie that she's promoting on this much maligned tour. Now, as for why it's much maligned, Huffington Post ran this story on the problem with Blake Lively's press tour for It Ends With Us, saying this: the film, which was adapted from the 2016 best-selling novel of the same name, follows Lively's character, flower shop owner Lily Bloom. She falls in love with Ryle Kincaid, a seemingly charming neurosurgeon played by director and co-lead Justin Baldoni, who lives in her building and pursues her. The couple's love story takes a volatile turn when Kincaid begins to abuse Lily. You would think the focal point of the press run would discuss the effects of abuse and how the cast and crew wanted the film to show how complicated narratives of domestic violence can be. Instead, Lively promoted her outside endeavors and seemed pretty flippant or downright avoidant when it came to homing in on how her character navigates abuse. She talked about her newly launched hair care line and tried to have lighthearted conversations with interviewers. Yes, she has seemed at times flippant and detached from the seriousness of her film's topic. But one of the reasons she's being criticized here is that she does this interview with this dude named Jake Hamilton, who asks her the weirdest and creepiest question, and in doing so, gets an answer that he deserves from Blake Lively, and she's being savaged for it. But maybe we should try just for a moment setting our gripes, our prejudices, our biases, and our agendas aside, and sit on that couch that she was sitting on in her floral dress and put ourselves in her mind as she's hearing this dude ask this weird-ass question. Jake Hamilton says this: most of us, if we are lucky enough to run into a celebrity in public, cringe. Right away, cringe, right? Can you imagine Blake's going, oh God, that? Okay, we only have maybe a few moments to speak with you guys. But for people who see this movie, who relate to the topic of this movie on a deeply personal level, they're really going to want to talk to you. This movie is going to affect people, and they're going to want to tell you about their lives. Oh, dear. So if someone who understands the themes of this movie comes across you in public, and they want to really talk to you, what's the best way for them to be able to talk to you about it? I'm sorry, what does that question even mean? What is he asking her? How would you answer that question? I mean, it depicts one of the most cringeworthy aspects of celebrity, right? Being hounded by strangers who want to talk to you and tell you all about their lives and interrupt your meal or your date or your quiet coffee at Starbucks, with the jabber that they bleed at you on the assumption that their self-importance supersedes your privacy or your solitude because you're a public person. It reminds me of this Bob Dylan song, Idiot Wind, a couple lines of which have always lingered with me when at one point Bob is talking about people coming up to him out of nowhere, strangers in public. And he says in Idiot Wind from his great 1974 record, Blood on the Tracks, people see me all the time and they just can't remember how to act. And Jake's like, yeah, Blake, so when you're confronted by people who just can't remember how to act around you because you're famous, how should they talk to you about their private concerns on the subject of domestic violence? It's like that Ray Davies song on that the Kinks do on the album with Lola on it, when they're talking also about the trappings of celebrity that can really torture bands who find themselves suddenly inordinately famous on the strength of a hit song or a hit record. And he at one point jokes about how bands then are going to be asked by interviewers for their theories about politics and religion. That's where this feels like it's going. And Blake answers Jake's stupid question with an answer that bears all the superficiality and flippancy that it deserves. And she says, do you mean like asking for my address or my phone number or like location share? I could just location share. And then she trails off and starts with about how she's a Virgo. And she says, I'm a Virgo, so we're always talking, are we talking logistics? Are we talking emotionally? Good for you, Blake. That was a creepy ass and weird question. People are going to come up to you and want to talk to you, and they're going to want a piece of your time. They're going to want to tell you about, to ask you, how do they talk to you about this? What? There's a Yahoo story that talks about that interview moment, giving you a taste of the beating Blake is taking in the press. It says this: it also seems like common sense to be ready to talk about the themes of a movie you're starring in. Also, as someone who has who also went through a domestic violence situation with a former beau. It's disheartening and gross to see a person with the ability to advocate for change and ways to navigate situations like this be so rude. It's very mean girl coded. But this, to me, may be where Blake and Lana have some connection beyond just Blake defending Lana's songs against those she claims were begging her to remove it from the film. You know, like Lana as a songwriter who neither condemns nor condones, but explores circumstances and realities, and then lets the listener come to their own determinations about them, it isn't really Blake's responsibility as an artist to advocate for anything. She's done her job, you know, which is to depict the kind of hellish reality far too many women experience, the reality of domestic violence. She's done that. And it amplifies the issue immensely and provides a platform on which others can discuss domestic violence, share resources that victims of that disgusting behavior can resort to, support groups in which people can share those experiences with one another, lean on each other for the kind of emotional and psychological support they desperately need. In fact, the very Yahoo story, an excerpt of which I just read you, ends with posting the phone number for the National Domestic Violence Hotline. Good. You know, that's what Blake's work in this film has enabled, a promotion for that cause. And also, for that matter, so has Lana Del Rey's work, because in her own, perhaps sideways, darker way of exploring the theme of domestic violence, she also amplifies awareness of the issue, does she not? She may be doing so in the form of a kind of persona song, writing in the persona of someone who might find herself addicted to her abuser. And certainly in a you know, what people like to call trauma bond situation. And some of these domestic violence incidents, as Phil Spector's demise indicates, can end in some very heinous outcomes. You know, Lana Clarkson is no longer with us because of that domestic violence incident. And that sucks. Okay? And that's what these domestic violence incidents can come to. That's how serious it is. And that's the extent to which I understand. I understand the sensitivity to the flippancy that Blake Lively has exhibited in some of these interview situations, because it's a very raw thing. And people who themselves are victims of domestic violence have been grossly violated in the most unspeakable of ways. And so, yes, I get it. I get it. But I would also like there to be a little more rationality to some of the criticism that Blake is experiencing, and perhaps a little clarity as to why, as she claims, she was begged to remove this Lana Del Rey song from this film, which I find to be rather fascinating and intriguing, given the work that Lana Del Rey has done in this space. Okay, material that revolves around the theme of domestic violence, which is the theme of Blake Lively's film. You know, art is not straightforward advocacy. It's art, in neither Lana's song nor Blake Lively's film. And I'm very happy, by the way, to hear Blake talk about, you know, the emotional experiences that she as an actress tried to communicate in this film, the song choices she made as a way of reinforcing those emotions, assisting the kinds of emotions that she was trying to communicate, helping bring them into, cast them into higher relief in ways that she felt only Lana Del Rey's music could, specifically her song Cherry. But to then demand that she also become an activist in addition to being an actress seems kind of batty to me. You know, just as it seems batty to demand that, you know, Lana's depiction of a persona undergoing a domestic violence or Stockholm syndrome be interpreted as an endorsement or glorification of brutality. That seems like a tragically unimaginative take on Lana's work. You know, much of this does seem nuts to me. And it seems like a perpetuation of the irrational mindset that has informed so much of the criticism that Lana Del Rey has experienced, especially for her earlier work, right? You know, as I've said in prior videos, when Lana comes out with Born to Die, and she does make those comments about feminism to Fader, comes out with songs like Ultraviolence, she does this interview with Billie Eilish. Yes, that Billie Eilish, who interviewed Lana Del Rey for Interview Magazine, in which she says in part, all of a sudden I was walking down the street, as I always did, and people would throw elbows at me. I was like, oh my God, no way did that actually happen. Someone recognized me and gave me a shove. Or in San Francisco, I was eating at a bistro and a woman threw a book about feminism at my face. I thought I was completely done for it. And when you listen to some of the criticism that emerged, the critical appraisals of Born to Die, like this from Pitchfork, you start to understand just how intense these anti-Lana sentiments were, and perhaps continue to be. And maybe that's the reason why people are gasping on the set of, or involved in the production of It Ends With Us, when Blake Lively wants to use Cherry, Lana Del Rey song, in the film. They're going, oh, Lana, the untouchable Lana Del Rey, we can't go there. We mustn't. Right? The impropriety of it. And Pitchfork said this about Born to Die, that Born to Die was the album equivalent of a faked orgasm. You've seen me mention this in my prior videos about Lana, and it's relevant to repeat this criticism here, because perhaps this is what continues to taint Lana Del Rey as an option for soundtracks in Hollywood these days. The New Yorker at that time said of Lana Del Rey that the character of Del Rey, authentic or not, is so inconsistent that she fades from view into her own photo spread. Has she faded from view? Born to Die, as of January 31st, 2024, spent 520 weeks on the Billboard 200 chart. Okay? That's 10 years, a full decade on that chart. A milestone that very few artists ever will rival. But we anticipated that she was going to fade from view back in 2012, did we? The New York Times said this about Lana Del Rey: a career founded on bad faith all around. Can't be long for this world. But at this point, what can Miss Del Rey do? Not much. Her biography is already written in concrete. The only real option is to wash off that face paint, muss up that hair, and try again in a few years. There are so many more names out there. Just as perhaps there are so many folks in Hollywood who wish that she would have done the same. And maybe these are the reasons why Blake Lively claims to have been begged to not use a Lana Del Rey song as part of It Ends With Us. So, yeah, Blake has said some stupid stuff on her press jaunt for It Ends With Us. In particular, there was a moment when apparently in an interview, sitting next to the author of the book on which the film was based, she encourages people to, quote, wear their florals as they go watch this film on the subject of domestic violence, as if they're going to the farmer's market some summery Saturday. Okay? That seems profoundly detached from the seriousness of the movie's subject. And again, I want to repeat, I understand the rawness that such flippancy provokes. I do get that, absolutely. But I also think it took some courage for Blake to stand up to those she says were begging her to leave Lana Del Rey's song off of the soundtrack, out of that scene in their film. You know, and to stand up for her music against the backdrop of all the criticism that I just reviewed, all the misunderstanding that Lana Del Rey's work has engendered, that took some audacity. And while Blake Lively is being torn to ribbons right now, I wanted to suggest that at least in this perhaps slight way, she's worthy of regard for the courage that she showed in defending an artist who continues to be rather maligned, I would suggest misunderstood. She, I believe, has a new record coming out next month, and look out for that critical reaction. She might be at it again. We'll see. But good for Blake for having the courage to stand up for Lana's music here. I know she's, again, not the most popular person in Hollywood these days, but in this regard, I applaud her for standing up for Lana's music when apparently she was being begged by just about all involved to do precisely the opposite when it came to that particular song choice of Cherry from her 2017 album Lust for Life, and using that in this film. And she said no, and it made it into the film. And what does the interviewer Olivia Marks say? I screamed when I heard that. What are the fans saying? Keeping Born to Die on the charts for 520 weeks? That her music, Lana Del Rey's music, is resonating more deeply with them than some of these critics ever anticipated.